Hey, Travis, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah. First night off. I worked the past 3 nights. It's
Oh, is that right? Wow.
yeah, it's been interesting because there's like literally obviously on midnight shift there's like nobody out really at night. So we're just sitting there.
Oh,
It-
oh, hold
it-
on one second. Paige, I put it up on Facebook.
It's on there. It's on Facebook. I clicked on the link. That's how I got it.
Look on my Facebook account.
Yeah, you go to a Facebook account. You have it linked there. Here's
Oh,
Katie.
hey, how are you?
But I'm
Nice.
listening from behind the scenes.
Yes. Yeah, that's
I listen
Paige
live
is like
too.
Paige said, I'm not putting my video up there.
I know. Lauren was like, you can just turn your camera off.
You
I'm like,
can.
I feel weird doing that. I'm listening. I just didn't want to sit in front of the screen.
Right. Oh, there's Pete.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna put speaker view on here. Hold on, Peter. He's
Not yet.
like he's getting it set up. Pete, he's muted. I'm gonna unmute him. Pete, can you hear me?
Yeah. We heard him there.
Okay.
No, you should be.
There you
Should
go.
be fine.
Is that Sean?
There you are. My tech guy is helping me.
Is that Sean?
It is.
Yeah.
What's up?
Hey, how you doing, Sean?
Hey.
Good to see you, buddy.
So am
Thanks
I?
for doing this, Pete.
Sure, absolutely. So you see me and hear me?
Mhm. You're about 3 miles away from me right now. Looks like.
Oh. Uh-oh. I'll get closer.
No, actually 3 miles away from me.
Actual
In
3
La
miles.
Piñata.
What street are you on?
We're on Sierra Vista, so we're in Spar Heights.
Okay.
We're sort of right down from the Trader Joe's.
Oh, all right. Oh, Sierra Vista. We used to live on Angeles.
Oh, did you really?
The next
A
block,
block
over.
over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know that.
No, I love that area. Boy, that area is blowing up now because of Honolulu.
Yeah, it really is. It is. Lots of good restaurants, and then the Trader Joe's really brought it around.
Yeah.
We have
Yep.
people coming in here, just filtering into the room. Really appreciate you doing this. This starts at
Sure.
4, so we've got a good lineup. Do you know Michael Connolly?
I know of.
Yeah,
I
he
don't
did.
know personally.
He did last week, and a lot of the Bosch stuff. You know, he's got
Right.
Bosch on Amazon. And then you have My Spy coming out this week, is it?
Well, we
How
don't
is that
have,
affected?
we don't know the exact date yet. I was just talking to Amazon, as a matter of fact, trying to find out. And they're like us, they're parents with their kids at home, and they couldn't wrangle their computer away from their kids till late this afternoon. So questions and answers are flying around right now.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah. It's new territory for me, that's for sure.
Well, let's talk, and then people will filter in here. I just got a text from a friend in the NFL who said he's just watching Tommy Boy as we speak
Oh yeah.
right now. Yeah, and that's hey, Mary Kay, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good to see you.
I'm going to just to keep the screen. I'm going to mute all participants, and then I'm going to unmute Pete.
Techniques right now. Too much.
Yes.
Desk lamp.
Okay, then I'm gonna. So I was watching, with Tommy Boy now, the 25th anniversary of that, and there was something in the making of which really interested me, how you would write out funny anecdotes that happened to you, funny stories, and lay them out, and then incorporate them into the movie. How do you do that when you're sort of adjusting on the fly, or what's the process there?
Well, it was a very unusual process because I had, well, the beginning of the story is that we had to try to shoot the movie during the SNL hiatus, which was in the summer. And I came in with a lot of notes on the script because it was not in good shape. And so I guess it was Lorne Michaels who, when he pitched it to Sherry Lansing, the then head of Paramount Pictures, he pitched it more as a Step Brothers kind of story about Chris Farley's character and Rob Lowe's character. And I said, no, I really think it's more about the two guys at the company who don't get along, who have to work together to save the factory. And well, that led to a lot of consternation and back and forth and notes. And we missed the summer hiatus, and now we were sharing Dave and Chris with Saturday Night Live, which has never been done before or since.
Concurrently doing a movie as their,
Yes.
wow.
So I tried to quit. I said, this is a disaster. And let's just say that Sherry Lansing did the right thing by forcing me. No, you're not quitting. So in more words than that, with a little bit more threat. But now, I have to say, I'm very thankful to her that she forced me to stay because, we're here talking about it quarter of a century later. But I got that phone call from her, and then I called Fred Wolf, who was the then co-head writer of SNL. And I said, Fred, you got to come over. Of course, I was saying this through snot and tears because I was crying at being threatened by the head of the studio. So I said, let's just start. What is this movie about? Basically, it's a road trip. So let's just start, talking about things that have happened to us. And there used to be a gas station by Wingstop over in Montrose.
Right. Yep.
Well, that's where I didn't park close enough to the gas pump. And so I backed up and I hyperextended my door. So he said, okay, that might be something. Let's write that down. Put it on the board. Then Fred had the oil can under the hood thing happen to him, and his hood flew up on the freeway. That's pretty good. Let's put that down on a card. And I had a date in high school, and I took this girl in my little 10-foot sailboat on McCormick Ranch Lake, and there was a dead calm, and the kids on the side of the lake started heckling me. And so I yelled at them, and I thought, Chris is a way better yeller than me. Maybe that'll be something. And that's how we started with these index cards of stuff that happened to us.
Yeah. How often does that happen? You get a germ of an idea of something that, is a little thing that happens to you, and you think, I could build a movie around that. Or we could, do you see the world through that lens?
Well, I think the old adage, write what you know, really does, have some truth to it. And when all else fails, if you're looking for something that people can relate to, as I'm telling you these stories, I told Fred those stories and vice versa. And if we could make each other laugh in the room, then maybe we had a shot at making other people laugh. And so that really is where, a germ of a comedic idea starts.
Yeah. It is, a lot of people think they're funny. They could come up. It seems like writing comedy has to be, and producing comedies has to be one of the most difficult sort of genres.
Well, I go back to something I learned from the Zucker brothers, because my first movie was the final installment of Naked Gun. And they learned from the Marx Brothers in that to test their comic material, the Marx Brothers would take it out and perform their movies in dinner theater. And they would, take notes of where the laughs were and where the laughs weren't. And they tightened up their scripts before they filmed them. And it was a very economical thing. With the Zucker brothers, I learned that if we ever were going to argue about, hey, I remember that joke at the last screening, it got a pretty good laugh. And then somebody else might say, it got like a little titter. We would check the tape, and the tape meant an audio recording of the crowd. Well, then on my second movie, Tommy Boy, I tried something a little different. I'd just been given a Sony Handycam for my birthday, and it had that night vision attachment to it, switch. And so I decided to turn the camera back on the audience and see them while we were recording, while we were, projecting the movie. And now that that is an industry standard. And what's fascinating about it is it's like time-lapse photography of a flower growing.
Right.
If you speed the tape up and you see the crowd's heads start to move like this, they're restless. So you press play and say, where are we in the movie? Because you can learn as much from the quiet moments, the dramatic moments, as you can just recording, yes, they laughed, no, they didn't laugh. And we tighten up, the dead spots, we cut them out and the movie gets shorter, and you're shortening the distance between the laughs, but you're also able to focus on people checking their watch or yawning and, ooh, what's going on there? Why are we not grabbing their attention better? So
now, will you go to, when you have a movie come out and, when the world is not off its axis like it is now, will you go to the theater multiple times just to sort of experience how other people are experiencing it? Or do you not want to see it again?
During the post-production process, we test the movie a minimum of 4 times, and tests are expensive. So because you have to hire a company to recruit the demographics that are probably most suited to your movie. And if you're skewing towards a female-friendly movie, you're going to probably put a few more, women in the audience above and below 25. The 4 quadrants are above, below 25, male and female. And so I see the movie a lot, during the testing process. We work on the movie a lot. And then by the time it comes out, usually after the premiere, I'll go, opening night, I'll drive around to a few theaters and see how it's working. But that's the crazy thing about movies is it's not a perfect science. Every movie theater may play it at a different volume. Their projector may be at a different brightness. And I'm driven nuts by how out of control the process really is once you give birth to it and it's out in the real world. I remember when 50 First Dates opened, my family and I, we were driving up to Mammoth to go skiing, and we stopped in Bishop, California, tiny town on Route 395. And on the marquee, this old movie theater was 50 First Dates. I said, this is perfect. I'm going to go in. Let's just see what it's like in a small town. And we go in, and it's like a cat had scratched the print. It was scratched and playing at, 10% its volume. I'm like, oh my God. I just turned around and ran. I didn't want to watch anymore.
That's great. I want to open it up to questions from the floor. If you have a question, you know how to raise your hand. You click on participants on the bottom, and then there should be something that says raise hand. If you have we'll see. And as we figure that out, tell me a little bit about working with Chris Farley.
Well, Chris and I had done a couple of things before Tommy Boy. I did an HBO special with Tom Arnold, and Tom and Chris were great friends. Matter of fact, Chris was Tom's best man in one of Tom's weddings. I can't remember which one. So I did an HBO special that had Chris and a very young Ben Stiller and a very young Jim Carrey. And actually, David Zucker, that's what he saw when he gave me a chance to interview for Naked Gun. But then after that, there was a spin-off in the early 90s of the Roseanne show for Tom called The Jackie Thomas Show. And Chris did a guest spot on that. And he was still under the influence at that point. And so Tom and Roseanne, right after we yelled, I see a picture of a dog.
Yeah, that's our dog. My daughter's, I'm going to mute her. Sorry.
Wow. Well, they put him into a car and took him off to rehab. But it was about a year and a half later that Tommy Boy came up. And at that point, he was clean and sober for the rest of the time that I knew him.
Okay. Brian Marciano, looks like I'll just go right down the list here. I'm going to unmute you and lower your hand.
Oh, excellent. First of all, Sam, thank you for doing this. It's a wonderful thing you're doing here. And then, Peter, you mentioned The Naked Gun. I think that was like 94. And OJ was in that. When did you wrap? And because I think the murders were like in June. When did you guys finish?
Good question. I had actually known OJ before the movie because my business partner in a production company that I started, in my 20s was Bob Chandler, and Bob was a wide receiver in Buffalo. And if you look at almost any OJ highlight, there's Bob Chandler lead blocking deep downfield. So I'd been acquainted with OJ, shot the movie with him. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a story, and then I'll get to what you specifically asked. But this is kind of weird. One day I walk up to OJ, who's talking to George Kennedy, who was also in the movie, and OJ showing him a knife, a Swiss Army knife with all the bells and whistles and a clock on it and everything. I said, "Wow, that is a really cool knife." And OJ said, "Here, have it." I said, No, it's just really cool. And he said, No, I've got a whole trunk load full of them. I'm on the board of directors for a Swiss Army knife. I went, "Oh, okay, great." So I took the knife. Well, the first house we lived in La Cañada, my truck was out on the street and it got robbed. And this was during the trial. And the cop taking the report said, "List all of the items in as much detail about them that were stolen. You never know, we might be able to, get it back for you." And I said, "Oh, I had a couple of tapes," and I gave the names of the tapes, and I said, "And I had this knife given to me by O.J. Simpson." And the cop stopped writing and looked at me, and he said, "Were there any inscriptions on the knife?" And I said, "Yeah, it said, 'Pete, please hold on to this till things blow over juice.'" No, there was nothing written on the knife. So my wife goes out and buys me a duplicate knife at Costco. And I said, "Hon, it's just not the same. I'm sorry." But so I finished that movie and I'm prepping Tommy Boy. And it's a strange story. My then assistant, we're watching the news in our trailer and we see OJ being arrested by a tree. And we're like, "Well, that's obviously a mistake. That's OJ. They got the wrong guy." Well, the last picture of OJ and Nicole was at the premiere for Naked Gun. And I'm in the background, right in between them, taking a huge bite of a sandwich. And that's the last shot of them. I sat next to Nicole in the premiere. So it happened way too fast. But ironically, the guy who was my assistant at the time, when we were watching the TV later on, he attempted murder on David Spade, if you remember that story. When Dave's assistant, I gave Dave my assistant, and things didn't go well. So, yeah.
Oh, wow. I never heard that story.
Kind of weird, yeah.
No,
I didn't know that.
There's a lot there. The one thing, you go back to Bob Chandler, I think also you mentioned him blocking downfield. In Super Bowl 15, Jim Plunkett to Kenny King, it was Chandler that was like 80 yards, and it was Chandler down the field blocking. Did you note, like when OJ, did you notice anything different during that time? Or
OJ was, at the time that I knew OJ, he was the nicest, sweetest, most charismatic guy.
Okay.
Obviously, he had some evil demons going on in there, and I had no idea. That's why it was so stunning to the world. And as a matter of fact, the fateful day of the big freeway chase, I was at Tom Arnold's birthday party, and he at the time had just separated from Roseanne, and he was living in one of those sky-rise Westwood condos, and it was a bunch of comedy writers. We were watching the NBA, what was it, finals or playoffs?
Houston and the Knicks.
Finals.
Yeah. And we heard all this, rumbling going on, and we looked off our balcony and we saw 14 choppers hovering over Brentwood. We counted the choppers. And of course, then Picture in Picture happened, and, they first started playing the OJ chase small and the basketball game big, and then it switched. And that was, again, incredibly surreal to see it happening in real time before our eyes.
Okay. No, I thank you. It's just neat to be able to ask you that.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. That was great. We've got Matt.
Hi, Mike.
Hey, Matt.
Hey
there.
On, everybody.
Your audio is really bad. We got bad audio.
Here. You're hearing better now.
Yeah, it's sounds like you're underwater.
Yeah.
Shoot. Okay, can you hear me? What was Chris Farley was famous for performing off camera when he wasn't in the script? What was like the funniest thing you saw him do, just like with a random person, or was he being recorded? Well, you got to make Tommy Boy.
Did you get that? Pete?
Unfortunately,
That was RoboCop.
it's really hard to hear. You got something bad with the audio.
I think he said, what were some of the things about Chris Farley off camera?
Oh, Chris
funny
was
things.
well. Chris was a super sweet guy. He was an athlete. He was a football player and a rugby player at Marquette, and he was very competitive. And if he felt like he wasn't nailing a scene or a line or a joke, he'd get really mad at himself and start cursing. And sometimes I had to treat him kind of like a coach. And I would just say, Chris, calm down, just drop and give me 20. And he'd do it. He'd stand up and go, yes, sir. And I'm like, okay, you calm? Let's try it again. And he'd do it a little better. And I remember another time he was getting really pissed at himself. And I said, hey, Chris, take a lap around the quad of this college campus we were shooting on. And he'd do it. And I realized that, that was how we related. And I kind of just saw it, in his eyes that he needed that kind of structure, to feel like he could perform, and have, guidance. One time though, I remember, because when we shot Tommy Boy, it might have been arguably the best cast on Saturday Night Live at the time. It was Sandler and Farley and Spade and Chris Rock and Mike Myers, and still the ratings were in the toilet. It was there was a book written at the time called Saturday Night Dead. So that, combined with the fact that this was the first SNL movie that was not based on characters from a sketch, these were original characters, everyone expected us to fail. And so I remember Chris and I were driving to meet Brian Dennehy for dinner one night, and we're in the car, and Chris looked at me and said, Pete, everyone expects us to fail. You know that? And I said, yep. And then he said, our only success is a victory. You've got to just prove them wrong. And so that was a cool moment that I kind of felt like, okay, we're in this together, and he's going to bust his ass as hard as he can. And now splitting time with Saturday Night Live. So we would have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in Toronto with Dave and Chris, and then they'd leave Wednesday night and go to SNL Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Remember, there's a post party that goes into the wee hours of the morning Saturday. So basically Sunday morning, they'd fly back to Toronto and we'd do it again. But the irony of it was we only started with 66 pages because, again, we didn't figure our story out, in the hiatus. So I was just writing with Fred, long distance. So if we didn't split the season with SNL, we wouldn't have been able to do the movie at all, because I felt like I was laying out the train tracks in front of the locomotive as we were going.
Wow. That must have been, just the pressure of that.
Well, my hair used to be very dark. And so it was like Benjamin Buttons. I saw myself in the mirror just aging from that process. It was a lot harder than it should have been.
Bob Hagan from the Minnesota Vikings here. My good friend Bob Hagan. Bob?
Hello. Well, much to my wife's unhappiness, I own a lot of movies, and I own all of your movies, Peter. So,
wow.
Even a couple on Laserdisc, and I still have them. I still have them all. So anyway, my question is, and thanks for setting this up, Sam, by the way. My question is, what is the favorite movie you've directed of yours, and then what is your favorite movie overall?
In general, that's not mine.
It's not yours.
Well, I'll start there. My favorite movie overall, it's kind of boring because it's a lot of people's favorite movie, but it's a sequel. It's The Godfather 2. There are only a few movies on that when they come on TV, it doesn't matter what part of the movie is on, you just say, okay, I'm done. And my wife goes, okay, I'm out. And my kids leave. And I'm like, let me just pour myself a glass of wine and I'm good to go. Now I would say I got to put Inglourious Bastards in there. That's another one of those movies that I could just, no matter what part of the movie it is, I will, watch the rest of it. for me, it is a little bit of a Sophie's choice. I can't really say what is my favorite movie. I think there are certain aspects of certain films I really like. Obviously, we're still talking about Tommy Boy 25 years later. That doesn't happen a lot, so that has a special place. I think there are a lot of things that I'm very proud about. Mostly Sam Farmer's performance in The Longest Yard. So I have to throw that in there.
It was a star turn, and I was snubbed by the Academy.
So I mean, there are different things. Get Smart was, probably the biggest movie that I had done with the biggest cast, and so I was very pleased. We started with a blank page there, and when I had Mel Brooks and Buck Henry in a screening separately, of course, because I didn't know they didn't care for each other anymore, and I got hugs and pats on the back. That was incredibly special. So there's different experiences for the different movies that are the things that I remember.
I just want to throw one in here. What was it like working with Jack Nicholson?
Jack is by far the biggest personality, the biggest persona of any. I mean, I've worked with a lot of big people, Jack Lemmon, Lauren Bacall, but when Jack walked in the room, the air was sucked out of the room. Everyone was just on pins and needles, a little bit frightened. And as a director, it's when you go up to the actor to give a note, and sometimes you lose yourself and you see the guy from The Shining, and you forget that he's just an actor and that was just a movie, but you go, so you all these images and memories in your head come flooding back, when you look into Eddie Murphy's face, and you just have to say, we're just here together doing a job. Right. You just have to remind yourself that you're in this together, and you've got adrenaline running, and you're both a little nervous. Neither one of you wants to be embarrassed. But Jack was definitely, someone that was a cut above that in terms of the adrenaline racing through your veins when you were talking to him.
I see. Tayu, you have your hand up here.
All right. Hey, Sam, first of all, thank you for hosting. And then, hey, Peter, and hey, everybody. Good afternoon from La Cañada, California. You're piggybacking on Sam's question and the poster behind you. There's a scene in Anger Management when Adam Sandler's going to go ask out Heather Graham at the bar. And then he looks back at Jack Nicholson, and Jack Nicholson gives him that creepy smile. That premeditated, or was that kind of like improv, like while shooting?
That was improv. That was Jack being Jack. There was, some actors don't like to improvise. They want to do with exactly what is on the page, and they feel very uncomfortable leaving that. And some thrive. And Jack, you have to be prepared. It's a little bit like a bucking bronc, and when they open the gate, you got to go for the ride. And sometimes you can guide it, and other times you can get bucked off. The analogy actually is legit, because sometimes you can say something to that person and they will not respond well. Why would my character do that? But other times they'll give you gold, like, a little tiny moment like that, which has become a meme now, that creepy smile.
It fascinates me, the role, and I don't want to cut you off there, buddy.
You're good.
The role, what's the role of a director? Can you kind of expound on that? Because it sounds like you're a coach, you're a psychologist, you're a manager, and you have to be an artist too, right?
Well, it's nice talking to you about this, because there are certain people, when I was an athlete, back in the day, and a long time ago, and I do use sports analogies, but the one that I think is most appropriate is, just take, for example, Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson never told Michael Jordan how to shoot the ball or exactly how to play. He guided, he suggested, he saw the other chess pieces on the board. And, you know, long gone are the days where you're the bombastic, you know, coach yelling at your players like, you know, Woody Hayes. That doesn't happen. And long gone also are the days of the director with the megaphone and the riding breeches and the crop yelling at the actors, the Billy Wilders. That doesn't happen. You can't do that anymore. So, you know, I've always said, you know, people always say, oh, that's such a beautiful shot. You must have had a great cinematographer. I was like, well, no, I designed the shots. The cinematographer may have a say, but directing is not photography. It's 10% photography and 90% psychology. And within that, you have to be very zen, and you have to, I remember watching Inside the Actor's Studio many years ago, and Danny Glover was being interviewed, and he was asked what makes a good director. And Danny Glover said, a good director is not someone who knows what to say always, it's when to say it. And that stuck with me.
Yeah. Well, how have you evolved over the course of your career as a director? I want to hear about how you started, but what would you do then that you certainly wouldn't do now as a director?
I talk less. Literally what I just mentioned, when I started out on my first movie, and I'll tell that's its own story of how I got that first movie, Naked Gun. But I was so scared that I drew every frame of the movie in storyboards. And the storyboard book I have is literally that thick. It's 2 phone books. And so I was very anal, and I gripped the reins very tightly, and I almost gave line readings to the actors. That means literally telling them how to say a line. You're not supposed to do that. That's a faux pas. As I've learned, you know, through the years, especially working with Eddie Murphy on Nutty Professor, I would invite Eddie to the monitor to see the last take, or, you know, the last take that we did, no matter what number we were on. And he'd look at it and go, got it. And he'd self-correct. He was smart enough to go, got it. I didn't have to say a thing. You know, we'd do another one and he'd go, oh, I have an idea. Or I'd say, oh, I got an idea. And this was adding to something, but it wasn't necessarily a critique of what he did. It was like, here's a new idea. And that's the most fun. I learned to be more creative deeper into my career. I was so scared. I just, you know, script is God, all of that. So I just wanted to get what was on paper as much as possible. As I gained more confidence, backed off, you know, I would let several takes go. And sometimes I'd have an anxious producer over my shoulder saying, aren't you going to say anything? Aren't you going to say anything? Not yet. Not yet. Sometimes they're just working out the kinks, you know? And so when I feel like let's say we're on take 4 or 5 and they feel pretty good that they've gotten it down, then I'll go in and I'll say, hey, why don't we try it this way? Or I've got an idea, but I never jump in, you know, like I used to in the beginning of my career.
How do you reach that level? How are you directing movies? Hollywood to me seems so monolithic. And where's the point of entry? There are a million people at the bottom of the ladder and precious few at the top. How'd you get there?
Well, I started out at USC, and I was a walk-on punter. I lasted about 6 weeks, and then I was cut. And then I thought, oh boy, now what do I do? And I was a junior, and I was a broadcast journalism English double major, and I really had no idea. So I got an internship at local Channel 2, CBS, and started working my way up. And when I graduated, I immediately shot into, you know, I was a production assistant on the John Robinson show, and, you know, start out in sports, and then got into, I don't know if you remember, but a million years ago, there were magazine shows at 7:30 Access, it's called. Yeah. Now it's all Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, has been for decades. But back then, there was a show called 2 on the Town, and it was what to do in LA. And eventually, after a number of years, they decided to do a comedic version of Two on the Town on Friday called Friday at Sunset, and it was things to do on the weekend. So my first assignment, I was 24. They said, best pizza places in LA. And I said, can I kind of think outside the box and just kind of try some weird stuff? And they go, just spell the name of the joint correctly and yeah, whatever. So I did a black and white takeoff of Citizen Kane, and it won a little local Emmy Award. And it kind of got their attention, and they said, okay, assignment number 2, best pool halls. And I said, can I? Yeah, just go. And so I did a takeoff of The Color of Money, and that won a little, local Emmy, and started building a career. And I remember watching at the time, there was, but I was still in reality television. This is the early days of reality television. And I watched on HBO at the time, there was a Billy Crystal special called Midnight Train to Moscow. And it was stand-up mixed with these scripted bits in and out of the stand-up. And I thought, gosh, that would be great if I could take because his stand-up was sort of his reality TV. If I could take what I do and wrap it around scripted so I can slowly evolve out of reality, that would be great. So I kept pitching myself to HBO, and eventually I got that first special with Tom Arnold and Chris Farley, and that led to a couple of more. And David Zucker saw those, and he was trying to take the route of his brother Jerry, who had just done Ghost the previous year. Which, think about that, you and your brother are, like the Farrellies, and then suddenly Pete Farrelly goes and does Green Book, and how does that make Bobby feel? Proud for his brother, but also like, well, what do I do now? And that's how I think David felt when Jerry became the biggest dramatic director, of that year. Ghost was the biggest movie of that year. So he was trying to do the Davy Crockett story, and he had a great script. And I remember they were talking to Tom Hanks, they were talking to Mel Gibson, and somehow it didn't happen. But at the time, he said, I'm not going to focus on Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult. I'm going to hire somebody else. So he brought me in, and I started a series of interviews. I was so petrified. I had to tell Linda, my wife, but I didn't tell my mother. I didn't want to jinx it. I had no idea how to go about. Now, the first R-rated movie I'd ever seen was Kentucky Fried Movie, which the Zucker brothers did. Right. And so I was petrified. These guys were gods to me. And do I give them a suggestion? Do I keep my mouth shut? What do you do? I had no idea. There was no script for me how to interview. So finally, they kept having me come back. Now we'd like you to meet Leslie Nielsen. Now we'd like you to meet Priscilla and OJ. And I kept going, okay, I don't know what else to say. And I thought, screw it, I'm just gonna pitch him an idea. That year, The Crying Game had come out. And so if you remember that movie, so I said, okay, you guys do parodies. I have an idea. In the climactic moment, the character played eventually by Anna Nicole Smith, she has a penis. And I went, you're hired. So I went, oh, that's what you wanted. You wanted ideas. Okay, got it.
Oh, do you wake up in the middle of the night and think of ideas? Is that how you
No, I just,
stuff down?
Whenever I'm stuck, I just think, what if they had a penis? And then it usually works out.
That's usually the panacea. Have audiences changed? Have the expectations of what people want from a movie evolved since you started early in your career?
Well, comedy is ever changing. I think it changes a lot more than drama. I started out during the era of joke book comedies with Naked Gun, and then I did a dumb guy comedy, then a political comedy, and then I eventually we were coming in on the heels of Something About Mary when I did Nutty Professor, and that was gross out comedy. And now, all of those seem long ago, those eras. And, I started, by the way, those HBO specials. I was in my early 20s, and I met Judd Apatow when he was 19, and he co-wrote those with me. And then Judd and I have remained friends all these years, and he started to evolve the the genre again into sort of a more honest, heartfelt, R-rated, version of our business. And who knows where it's going to go next. I mean, I think obviously a lot of female talent has emerged in the past, decade, both in front of and not enough behind the camera. But, you've got, great talented people. Tina Fey is one of the smartest people, and she has her own style of comedy, and everything evolves. I mean, I don't think you could look at All in the Family. Actually, you could look at All in the Family and say that could work today. Joe's a bad example, but there are a lot of, sitcoms from the 90s that just would feel old-fashioned today. Right. And same with movies. They change.
I want to remind people you can raise your hand virtually. Just click on participants and then raise your hand. We have a little bit more time with Pete. Can you tell us a little bit about My Spy and what your latest project and what you're working on now?
Sure. My Spy is a action comedy for families. It's a PG-13, so a little spicier than let's say Trolls, which is out right now. We shot it. It was the first time I had been back to Toronto since Tommy Boy 24 years ago. And there was an opportunity to work with Dave Bautista, and I thought that he was incredibly good in Guardians of the Galaxy. And so it was sort of in the vein of Leon the Professional, Jean Reno and Natalie Portman, but more as a family-friendly film. But that same kind of friendship between a very unlikely duo. And we shot it about a year ago, and then it was supposed to come out March 13th, Friday the 13th, actually. And I was prepping a dramatic TV series, which I'm still going to do when the pandemic is over, in Atlanta, called Heels, about the independent professional wrestling world in a small town in Georgia. And on that same day, sent home from Heels, and our movie got, fortunately, 1 week before, pushed to mid-April. Unfortunately, they didn't push 17 of the territories internationally, and the movie opened on a Friday and closed on Saturday, along with all the theaters. So we've been sitting in limbo, and for the past month saying, what do we do? And all the movies that opened on March 13th, which were Bloodshot and I Still Believe and one other, they had about a 4 or 5 day run in the theaters before the theaters in the United States were shut down. They all went to video on demand. So we thought, is that the route for us? And sure enough, we started getting, or the studio started getting, all these calls from all the streamers, because the streamers, the Netflixes, the Amazons, the Hulus, everything that they were shooting got shut down. So their pipeline also froze. So if you go to the menus, it's like people are binging old series or stuff they've either already seen or didn't see the first round, but there's nothing new coming on. So now this is a very rare thing that there's a theatrical movie, My Spy, and Amazon bought it. They said, we want it very badly. We said, well, you know what, maybe we should go this route, because we didn't know when. By the time the theaters open, first of all, the question is going to be, it's like Roy Scheider on the beach in Jaws. Who's going to go back into the water? Yeah. Right? Are you all just is it going to be a starter's pistol and everyone floods? I don't think so. Mm-hmm. And let's say 60% of people go in. So are you willing to have 40% less success for your theatrical release? No. Well, if you wait too long, now you're going to be in this big rugby scrum of all these movies that were log jammed. So people are saying, wait, maybe we should go reach the families that are stuck at home right now. So last week, or a few days ago, I should say, the movie Trolls came out and did 10 times the video on demand first weekend that Jurassic World did. 10 times. Wow. They're almost on Avengers numbers. And we're just saying, oh my gosh, we need to get our movie out sooner rather than later. Amazon's scrambling. They're figuring out, because they still have to do some promotion and say, hello, the movie that you thought was in theaters, and there's still posters around town. saying coming out on March 13th, but now it's shifting over to Amazon. We're thrilled that it is, but this is very uncharted territory.
Yeah, I wonder if this will represent a temporary situation or a seismic shift and change our habits completely.
I don't have the answer to that. I hope it doesn't change our habits of going to the theater completely, because that's an experience that, is a shared experience. The sad thing for me is our movie tested through the roof. We were in the 90s several times. And what's great is to hear the audience laugh and gasp at surprises and things like that. And now I won't ever be able to see or hear that. It's just off into its own world, into everyone's living rooms. So for that, I'm sad, but the fact that it at least will be seen. And I think there are a lot of kids, families saying, okay, you've done your studies for today, and we can't have play dates. We need something to do. So I'm happy for that.
Travis Turner, we've got a question here.
All right. Well, thank you, Sam, again for hosting this. There's so many, I guess, classic quotes in the movie Tommy Boy, and I'd say one of my favorites is the scene when they're in the gas station and he does the flash dance episode, which was my first rated R movie that I saw as a kid. How many of those like classic scenes were improv or scripted?
Well, I'll tell you exactly how the Flashdance scene came up, because again, when we started, we only had half a script. Fred Wolf had to go back to Saturday Night Live to run the show. I was shooting that scene, and I was setting it up during the day. It was a night scene, and something just felt flat. It wasn't really working. So I called Fred, and I said, dude, have any ideas? And he says, well, describe the setup for me. I said, well, it'll be, Rob Lowe's going to be hosing him off, and the water will be splashing, and he's backlit. And he goes, oh, Flashdance. I went, got it, see ya. And I went back to the set. I mean, that was brilliant. That's all I needed to hear, Flashdance. So then I told Chris, and he did the Maniac song. And of course, our producer said, but we don't know if we can clear that. I'm like, I don't care. And we just put it together that afternoon.
Incidentally, one of our guests coming up is Michael Nuri, who was the
the
lead in Flashdance.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to pick a favorite scene, like when David Spade hits Chris Farley with the piece of wood across his face. And he's like, it doesn't hurt here, or here, but right here. Was that another one that was like an improv one, or?
Well, that was first day of principal photography. But the scene where he was clobbered with the wood, that was a little further into production, and Dave missed and didn't hit Chris with the soft rubber part of the prop, and he hit him literally with the hard wood part. So that was a real reaction. Yeah.
I like and this is apropos of how I feel right now. I like that line where he says, I can hear you getting fatter.
Well, the fact in the little coat one, was that a scripted one, or was that one that was improv?
We were taking anything we could from Dave and Chris's real life and behind the scenes shtick. And Fat Guy in a Little Coat was something that Chris actually did to annoy the other writers at Saturday Night Live. He just tap on the door, take their coat off the rack and go, Fat Guy in a Little Coat. And we said, you know what? We're going to put that in the movie. Well, what happened though is Chris was used to Saturday Night Live, which is live, one take, you're done. So in movies, you have to shoot this direction and then turn the cameras and the lighting around and shoot this direction. So after we got off Chris and turned it around on Dave, he got bored doing the same scene over and over again. So he sang it. But I didn't notice because I was focusing on Dave's part. And my editor, Bill Kerr, called me that night and said, oh my God, I was like crying with laughter in dailies. I said, what are you talking about? I mean, it was fine. I didn't think it was crazy funny. And he goes, no, you didn't. You missed what he was doing off camera. He was singing. He says, you got to go back and reshoot that. I'm like, oh, you're right. So we went back and reshot it. And so the song was an accident. But I remember getting a call from a buddy of mine who I went to high school with in Arizona, who was a Top Gun fighter pilot. And he told me that when the Top Gun fighter pilots would put on their flight suits, that's the song that they would sing.
Yeah, it's hard to pick a good one. They're all so great. It was a great movie.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it was. We got Mary Kay Cabot. She's the longtime not long time. She's young, but Cleveland Browns writer for the Plain Dealer. Mary Kay? Did I lose her?
You still have her muted. There you go.
Oh, wait, there we go. I'm gonna unmute you. Mary Kay?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep, there you are.
Okay.
Not long time.
No,
But-
long time. Definitely long time.
Yes.
So, Peter, I was curious. You mentioned that there are, I guess, precious few women in comedy behind the camera. And I was watching the Modern Family finale the other night, and they went into the writer's room, and it struck me that amazing comedy that I howled at every week, like I didn't really see any women in that writer's room. And I was surprised because the female comedy in the show is on point. It's so funny. They nailed it with Claire and everything all the time. So I'm curious to know, is that true? Even today, that there are sort of precious few female comedy writers?
There are not enough, but there are. What's really interesting right now is it's hard to tell a story from a female perspective if you're not a female director or a female writer. And I think studios now, rightfully so, are looking toward women or people of color to tell their story. I mean, as unfair as I think it was for Pete Farrelly 2 years ago when he wrote Green Book, he got criticized because he was telling the story of an African-American musician, but he was also telling the story of the driver who was his friend's father. And his friend told him that story, and they co-wrote it and won an Academy Award, not just for the screenplay, but for the movie. And he still got criticized for it. And I'm not 100% sure today that they would have greenlit that, with a white director telling that story. So I think, and obviously I just did a movie last year with Jennifer Lopez, and she's a producer on it, a woman of color. Her producing partner is a woman, and I was the odd man out, and I felt kind of lucky to be there, telling a female point of view story. And I think times are changing for the better. And I think you're going to see more. You're going to see more. And my daughter, who's a executive at Lorne Michaels' company, Broadway Video right now, I give her scripts that I'm considering all the time, and she'll tell me, you definitely need a female perspective on this. You need a female writer. Even if a spec was written by a guy, which is maybe unfair to the guy, but she said, I feel it.
Very interesting. Thanks. I really appreciate that.
Sure.
Last thing, we'll wrap this up, but I wanted to, Matt says his audio is back. Matt, do you want to ask that question? Let me see. Matt, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
There you are.
Yes, now.
You have a
All
normal
right.
voice now.
I'm back. Great.
You studied film, Matt has.
And I had a premiere scheduled for March 13th as well. So I feel you on that one. But if we want to talk more about this crazy new world of distribution, that's a whole other conversation. But on 50 First Dates, I heard an interview Drew Barrymore gave about that movie and how much it meant to her, that opportunity, and how you and Adam were really not taking a chance because she's so talented, but taking a chance just because of where she was in her career at the time. What was that like working with her on 50 First Dates?
Drew is such an amazing person. We became good friends during that movie and remained good friends after. I really don't know what she's talking about that, at that stage in her career, because she was, one of the highest paid female actresses. She was coming off Charlie's Angels, the first one, which was a huge success. I think she, you know, had such a special relationship with Adam from Wedding Singer that it was cool to see them reunite for this, and they became their own Hepburn and Tracy, you know, of the 90s and late 80s. And then they worked again on Blended. And that was cool because I remember Adam saying, originally the story took place in Seattle, and he said, we're going to change it. Let's go surf in Hawaii. And at first I thought, well, that's not reason to, you know, relocate the movie to Hawaii. But ironically, it completely changed the personality of the film. Now all of the characters were Hawaiian. The locations were incredibly different, and it really, you know, like I said, completely changed the look and feel of the movie. And Drew fit in. She changed her look. She went from brunette to blonde, and we developed such a shorthand working on that film. It was just so pleasant. So I would sometimes look at her, and if I learned just saying, if that was a 6, try a 7, or if that was a 7, try a 5, just up and down. And sometimes I would just, from behind the camera, I'd go, right? We'd have sign language. She'd like a pitcher on the mound, and I'd be the catcher, and I just, the subtlest of things. And she got it and would nail the next take. And sometimes Adam looked at me and was like, what'd you just say to her? You didn't say anything to her. And I said, oh, I did. And so that was awesome. I have a very special place in my heart for her.
Yeah, The Wedding Singer was that was the movie I was thinking of from the interview. But you mentioned a lot of different ways of preparing sort of for each different film. Like you said, Tommy Boy was a lot of Post-it notes in the hotel room the night before. I imagine with writing with Judd Apatow, he has a very different process. Does it vary? Are there things you try and keep consistent between films, or things you have to just adjust on the fly based on the project?
A little bit of both. I mean, I think you always bring with you your bag of tricks, you know, the things that you've learned, you know, that's where your wisdom comes into play. You learn what not to do a second time that, you know, what was a mistake. But you've got to stay open to new ideas on the set. I like to hire in the casting process actors who can improvise, but you're only as good as, a tennis analogy, the person on the other side of the net. If you hit the ball really hard and they suck and they can't hit it back over the net, it's going to be a very short rally. Same thing goes with improv. If I zing a new line to you, but you go, and you don't know what to say, well, that scene's dead. So you have to be mindful of that in the casting process so that you get two great players who can hit it back and forth. And then that's the most fun because then you're guiding, you know, and then you have ideas. And what I try to do, Judd is stand-up comic at heart. And so the ideas come fast with him, and he will sometimes sit behind the camera with a microphone and just like, say this, right? For me, I that's like the kid that goes into the, you know, to school without studying and aces the test. I hate those people because I had to always, you know, study my ass off. So what I will do is I will put a list together of what are called alts, alternative jokes. And whether it's myself or I'll, you know, farm it out to friends of mine, other comedy writers, and I'll come to the set with the 5 things that Judd on the fly might be just, you know, calling out. I did my homework like, you know, the little asshole, you know, who was like, hey, here's my report. And, you know, I feed them to the actors, and I don't give them ahead of time. I'll just walk up to them and say, try this one. And then sometimes they'll say, ooh, well, what? I got one. And that's the real fun, when you can just start going beyond the page on the day.
When they can say it better than you imagined it in your mind.
Hell yes.
Yeah, totally. I had a follow-up, but it escaped me. The deer story is great from Tommy Boy, getting that scene, the combination of a real animal with the tricks. Oh, and I'm a homework guy too. I can't do results-oriented direction. I'm always big on homework. And I was watching the behind the scenes, and you were talking about your storyboards in that deer scene. And there was a shot of one of them, and it was just a circle with a hoof through it. And I instantly recognized that shot from the movie. And I laughed hysterically at that storyboard because the timing of that shot, the way the hoof just smashes the speedometer, like at the right moment to make it look like it's accelerating. I just, from that storyboard, that moment was just so sharp in that mind and got a laugh. So, and I could see why starting out, you want to do that. And then as you get more comfortable, you're more open, I guess.
Yeah, well, that kind of thing you do need to plan. It's hard to, like, not that that couldn't come up on the day. That was definitely a planned shot. And there's certain shots that you need to plan because you're going to say, okay, I need a deer hoof. I need a breakable speedometer. Sometimes, coming up with that on the day, you say, I have an idea, but I didn't plan it. Well, I don't have a breakable speedometer. This car costs a lot of money. It's a classic car. And, I only have a deer skin. I don't have a hoof. So those types of things you do have to plan ahead of time. It's more dialogue that you can be, a little more freewheeling with. But that scene, you heard the story of how that was put together. That was,
well, that sounds like it took a lot of lead-in time getting the actual guy. You're the only director I know of who successfully trained a deer.
No, I didn't train him. Ironically, I got to work with that same animal trainer. When we went back to Toronto, like I mentioned a year ago, there were about a dozen people that came up to me and said, by the way, I worked on Tommy Boy with you. I'm like, oh my God, why are you feel like you're all like coming out of the closet? Just like, let's all just give a big hug. That was like a cool thing. I got to work with the same animal trainer again. And he came up to me and I didn't recognize him. We've all changed, 25 years ago. And he goes, I'm the deer guy. I'm like, oh my God, I've talked about you in books. But yeah, I mean, of all of my storyboards that I gave that guy, I'll just tell the story really quickly. He said, flipping through the pages, nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that. Nope. I'm like, I've got no scene. What do you mean I can't do it? He said, you can't train a deer. Deers are untrainable. I'm like, okay, I can give you that last one. The deer standing on the car and jumping off. I'm like, oh, okay. One shot of my entire sequence. I said, what do you need? He goes, well, I need one of those Plymouth GTXs. I'm like, okay, for a month. I'm like, why? Well, we have to plant the car in a field and hide the cameras in bushes. And we got to put a ramp on the back of the car and put food in the car and have the deer come up the ramp and eat and shit and piss in the car so he smells himself. And then one night, in the middle of the night, when he does that, we're going to turn on the lights and the cameras and he'll be startled, he'll run away. 1 month later, the footage arrived. It worked. And that's the only shot that we got. And so he said, do you want the car back? I said, no, you can keep it.
That's great. That's just, all the work that goes into that shot, and it makes it completely real. You believe the speedometer because that you see that real deer on the back of the car.
Well, here's where you do have to be, malleable and able to adjust quickly. So we spent when we heard that we could not train a deer, we built an animatronic deer. And it was so horrible. It looked like, one of the dolls in, It's a Small World. It just was just so robotic. And I was like, oh, that is terrible. We actually have a few frames of it right before the car hits. It don't look too closely. You could just see it was like, it's just horrible. But then we said, well, how are we going to get the rest of this stuff with the deer destroying the car? And at the end of the day, we threw out all of our ideas, and a grip came up to me and said, give me the deer skin and the head, and he just got inside the car and just started acting like the deer under the skin, a grip on the day. That was in the movie. I mean, I thought we were dead, but thank God he had a good idea. I didn't.
That's awesome. Pete, thank you so much. This was really, really entertaining. I'm going to unmute everybody.
Thank all of you.
Thank you. Thank
It
you.
was fabulous.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Sam.
Stay healthy
That
and
was
safe.
terrific,
Sam, thank
guys.
you.
I want to remind you that coming up this week, tomorrow night, we have Larry Paul, the Steelers owner and also vice chairman of the American Red Cross. And on Friday, Dick Ebersol and Susan St. James. And then next Tuesday, Rick Riley. So this is terrific. Pete, cannot thank you enough. It was fabulous.
Thank you, Sam.
I have a
Good
lot of
talking to
movies
y'all.
to see now.
Thank you. Same time.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Sam.
Yep. Thank you, guys.